Okay, let's try a quick word association game. I say grammar. What's the very first thing that pops into your head?
Oh, probably a red pen. Or maybe a really stern teacher, tapping a chalkboard somewhere, asking why you split an infinitive.
Exactly. It just feels corrective, like a bunch of arbitrary traffic laws for language that are only there to catch you speeding.
Hmm.
But we're looking at a stack of research today, mostly from a deep history by Anneli Lutala, that suggests we've got this completely backwards.
We really do. I mean, if you actually look at the evolution of pedagogical grammars, which is the very heavy title of our source material, you realize that for something like 1,500 years, grammar wasn't just about spelling.
Right.
It was the operating system of the Western mind.
That's the metaphor. That's what I want to hang on to today. Grammar as an operating system.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about the history of these textbooks, it's not just about how people learned Latin.
No, not at all.
It's about how humanity figured out how to process information itself.
Precisely. Before you could do any math, before you could study the stars or argue law or theology, you had to install the OS. You had to master grammar. It was the absolute gateway to the liberal arts.
But the install process, let's call it,
Yeah.
it changed so much over time. And that's what Lutala's research gets into. We go from the factory default settings of the Roman Empire
Right.
to the user patches that medieval monks had to invent, all the way to the graphical user interface of the Renaissance.
And it is a bumpy ride. I mean, there are bugs, system crashes, and some updates that took like 1,000 years to download.
So let's boot up that original version. Let's go to late antiquity. Rome is still more or less the center of the world. What does that factory default grammar look like?
So in the late Roman period, you've basically got two main types of manuals. You have what's called the Schulgrammatik. That's your systematic, here are the parts of speech kind of textbook. And then you have the Regulae, which are more like guides for pattern recognition. But the gold standard, let's say the Microsoft Windows of the 4th century, was a man named Donatus.
Donatus, this guy is a titan.
He's inescapable. For 1,000 years, if you learned grammar, you were reading Donatus.
Yeah.
He wrote two key versions, the Ars Minor, which was the elementary edition, and the Ars Mare, the advanced course.
I was looking at the Ars Minor, and it's set up like a dialogue, a script between a teacher and a student.
It does, yeah, but don't let the format fool you. It looks like the Socratic method, asking questions to get you to think, but it's actually what we'd call a catechism.
A catechism? You mean like for religious instruction?
Exactly that. It's a script for pure rote memorization. The teacher asks, what is a noun? And the student is expected to fire back this perfectly formed, really complex definition.
Right, I noticed that. You can't actually answer the question unless you already have the answer memorized. It's not checking if you understand.
No.
It's just checking for data retention.
It's a password check. Do you have the file? Yes, here is the file. And the definitions themselves were incredibly philosophical. Donatus didn't define a noun by what it did in a sentence. He defined it by its metaphysical properties.
This was that whole corporeal versus incorporeal thing.
Yes. He taught kids that a noun signifies either a body corpus or a thing, Ressa. A body is something you can see or touch, like a horse. A thing is abstract, like piety or virtue.
That feels incredibly heavy for a beginner. You're asking an 8-year-old to figure out the difference between physical matter and abstract concepts just to identify a word.
It is heavy, but you have to remember who this was written for. These were Roman kids. They already spoke Latin. They didn't need to be taught how to say the word for table.
Yeah.
They needed to be taught how to categorize the reality they were already living in.
So the OS just assumed the user was already a native admin.
Exactly. But Donatus did give them some practical tools to help with gender. He used tokens. This is the classic hic, hic, hoc system.
Well, I remember this from my very brief attempt at Latin.
It's a classic because it works. Instead of explaining the abstract concept of masculine gender, Donatus would just say, hic magister, this teacher, hac musa, this muse. He used the pronoun this as a kind of tag.
A handle. You grab the handle and you know the gender.
Right. But Donatus was mostly about lists and categories. If you wanted to understand how the machine actually ran, how to build sentences, you needed the advanced manual. You needed Priscian.
Priscian. He comes a bit later, right? Around 500 AD. And this is where we get into parsing.
Priscian is the heavyweight theorist. He wrote the Institutiones Grammaticae. And his method, the Partitiones, was this intense atom-by-atom deconstruction of literature.
The example in the text was Virgil's Aeneid, of course.
The standard drill, they'd take the first line, Arma vinumque cano, I sing of arms and a man. And they would just stop right there. The teacher would ask, How many parts of speech are in this verse?
And the student has to count them. 9.
How many nouns? 6. And then they drill down on a single word, like arma, arms, what part of speech, noun, what gender, neuter. How do you know?
And you have to recite the rule back, because all nouns ending in A in the plural are neuter.
It was a relentless cross-examination. But Priscian introduced a tool here that I think is just brilliant. It's called the replacement test.
This is to figure out ambiguity,
Right.
Because Latin has this issue where a word can look exactly the same but have different jobs in the sentence.
Correct. Let me try an English analogy to make this clear. Think of the word sheep. If I say the sheep saw the wolf, sheep is the subject.
Okay.
If I say the wolf saw the sheep, now sheep is the object. But the word itself looks and sounds exactly the same.
Right. It's ambiguous on its own.
But now think about the word he. As a subject, it's he. As an object, it changes to him.
He saw the wolf versus the wolf saw him. Yeah, the form changes.
So Priscian taught students that if they were stuck on a word like sheep, or in Latin, arma, they should mentally swap it out for a word that does change, like he, him. If the sentence makes sense with him, then, sheep is working as an object.
That's basically algebra. You're solving for X by substituting Y.
It is. It shows they weren't just memorizing, they were analyzing the structural logic. But again, and this is the crucial pivot point in history, this whole system was designed for people who intuitively knew what sounded right.
And that leads us to the system crash. The Roman Empire falls, the infrastructure collapses, but the church survives. And suddenly, the people trying to learn Latin, they aren't Romans in sunny Italy. They're Irish monks on a rainy rock in the North Atlantic.
This is the exact moment the factory default OS just stops working. I mean, imagine you're an Irish monk in the 7th century. Your native language is Gaelic. It has totally different sounds, different structures. You've never heard Latin spoken at a market.
But you have to learn it for the Bible.
You have to. But when you open Donatus, he's talking about corporeal bodies and giving you definitions that assume you already know the language. It's like trying to learn Japanese from a dictionary written only in Japanese.
So they had to hack the system. They needed a patch.
They created the insular grammars from the British Isles. And the genius of the Irish monks was that they realized they didn't need philosophy, they needed patterns. They shifted the focus from definitions to declension paradigms.
Declension paradigms. That sounds very technical, but we've all seen these. They're the charts.
Exactly. The grid. Nominative, genitive, dative down the side, singular, plural across the top, and then just a list of endings. A.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying the Romans didn't really use those charts?
Not like we do, not in that grid format. The Romans would organize things by, say, gender or by definition. The Irish monks just said, look, I don't care about the metaphysics, just show me the visual pattern of the endings. They turned grammar into a visual lookup table.
That is a massive shift in user experience. It's going from understand the soul of the word to here's the code to decrypt the ending.
It's the difference between being a mechanic and just being a driver. The Romans were mechanics. The monks just wanted to drive the car. And while they were at it, they decided to update the content too.
The examples.
Right. The Roman books were full of pagan stuff. Roma, Tiber, Cicero. If you're a devout monk, maybe you don't want to be chanting about pagan cities all day long.
So they just did a find and replace.
A literal cultural overwrite. This grammarian named Asper, around 600 AD, he starts swapping them out. So Roma becomes Jerusalem, Cicero becomes Peter or Stephen.
But then you have Smaragdus. I feel like Smaragdus is the guy who takes the joke way too far.
Smaragdus is the power user who customizes the OS until it's just unrecognizable. He put something like 750 Christian examples into his grammar. He basically made the textbook a sermon.
He made the median the message.
He did. But even with these hacks, the text of Donatus itself was still a problem. It was too dense. The source calls it concise to the point of being incomprehensible.
So how do they solve that?
They invented the commentary. And this is sort of a fascinating bloatware situation. The student would have the Ars Minor, the textbook, but then they'd need a commentary, a second, much thicker book, just to explain what the first book was even saying.
It's like buying a new smartphone. But it's so complicated you have to buy a 500-page For Dummies guide just to turn it on.
And eventually, the For Dummies guide became more popular than the phone itself. People stopped reading Donatus and just read the commentaries.
So we have the Irish patch for the word endings. But what about the sentences? Because Latin word order is so flexible, and for a non-native speaker, a complex sentence must have looked like just a jumble of words.
Oh, this was the hardest part. In English, we rely on word order. subject, verb, object, the dog bit the man, flip it, the man bit the dog, and the meaning totally changes.
Right.
In Latin, the endings tell you who bit whom, so the words can be in almost any order, which is a nightmare if you're trying to decode it word by word.
So what do they do?
The medieval students developed a visual code. They called them construing marks. They would physically draw little dots and strokes above the words in the manuscript. So 1 dot over an adjective, 1 dot over the noun, it modifies, even if they were 5 words apart on the line.
It's connect the dots for syntax.
It's an overlay. They were visually unscrambling the code right on the page. But as we get into the High Middle Ages, the 12th, 13th centuries, there was this push to synthesize everything, to combine the rules, the theology, the syntax into one, super manual.
And that gives us the Doctrinal.
The blockbuster.
Doctrinal, yeah. Written by Alexander of Villadaye in 1199, it survived in over 400 manuscripts. This was the Harry Potter of grammar books, and its main selling point, it rhymed.
Averse grammar. I can see the logic. I mean, rhyme helps memory. I before E, except after C.
It helps memory, yes. But here's the problem. It kills comprehension.
How so?
Well, think about writing a poem. You have to fit a really strict meter. Da-de-you, da-de-yum, da-de-yum. To make the grammar rules fit that meter, Alexander had to use weird phrasing, convoluted structures, obscure words.
So to make it memorable, he made it unreadable. Exactly. He introduced bugs into the OS just to make the interface prettier. The text was so cryptic that, you guessed it, you needed another commentary just to understand it.
Yeah.
But it dominated education for centuries because it was seen as comprehensive.
Okay, speaking of syntax,
Yeah.
this is the part of Lutala's research that actually made me stop and just stare at the page. The whole subject and predicate issue.
The 1,000-year lag. This is maybe the most stunning example of academic silos I have ever seen.
So just to clarify for everyone, subject and predicate, these seem like the most basic tools in the box. The cat, subject, set on the mat, predicate.
You would think so, and here's the kicker. The concepts existed. In the field of logic, which was a totally separate university subject, scholars were using the term subjectum and predicatum as early as the 9th century. They had the tool.
So the logicians had the tool, but the grammarians just didn't use it.
Nope. For almost 1,000 years, grammars described sentences using these much clunkier terms. They talked about supposition or apposition. They treated a sentence like a flat string of words that had to agree, not as a hierarchy of subject and predicate.
But why? That's like the physics department discovering gravity and the engineering department saying, nah, we're going to keep building bridges, assuming things just float.
That is a perfect analogy. It was pure tradition. Christian hadn't used subject-predicate, so the medieval grammarians didn't either. They just stayed in their lane. It wasn't until the late 18th century, almost the modern era, that subject and predicate became the standard way to teach grammar.
That implies that for 10 centuries, students were learning a harder, less efficient system just because the professors wouldn't talk to each other.
It shows you how sticky an operating system is. Once a pedagogical tradition is installed, it is incredibly hard to update, even when a much better version exists right next door.
So let's get to the final big update, the Renaissance. The humanists. They usually get all the credit for saving learning, but in this story, they had a very specific problem to solve.
The humanists wanted to purge the system. They looked at the Doctrinal with its bad poetry and medieval inventions, and they just called it barbaric. They wanted to go back to the pure classical Latin of Cicero.
Make Latin great again.
Essentially. But they hit the exact same wall the medieval monks did. You can't just hand a 16th century German kid a copy of Cicero and say, go on, read. The gap is just too wide.
So they needed a new interface.
They needed a GUI, a graphical user interface, and they found it in the vernacular.
This part fascinated me. They started using the students' own language, English, German, French, as the key to unlock Latin.
This is the vernacular token. In England, you had Lily's grammar. In Germany, Melanchthon. And they explicitly use native words to teach these grammatical concepts.
Give us an example.
Okay, take the genitive case. In Latin, it shows possession. The humanist said, look for the English word OF. If you see OF, that's the genitive.
The house of the Lord.
Exactly. Or, in German, Melanchthon used the articles der, die, das to teach the Latin genders.
It seems so obvious to us now. Use what the kid already knows to teach what he doesn't. But that must have been radical.
It was an admission that the student was a different kind of user. It was pedagogical empathy. And this led, naturally, to the ultimate interface update, visuals.
Learning through the eye.
We move away from the auditory culture of, chanting rhymes in a dark room. We start seeing diagrams, branching trees of verbs. And finally, you get Comenius's Orbis Pictus, the world in pictures.
The first picture book.
It's the first time the OS had desktop icons. Instead of just hearing the definition of teacher, you saw a woodcut of a teacher and it was labeled magister. You saw the world and the word at the same time.
So we've traced this whole arc. We started with Donatus, the factory default for native speakers. We hacked it with the Irish declension charts. We suffered through the glitchy rhyming doctrinal. And then finally we got the user-friendly version with the humanists and their picture books.
It's a long evolution, and here's the so what of the whole story. If you open a Latin textbook today, or even a Spanish or French textbook, what do you see?
You see a chart of endings, you see pictures, you see explanations in English.
It's a Frankenstein's monster. It's a patchwork code with pieces from every single one of these eras. We are still using the Irish monks' charts. We are still using Priscian's syntax analysis. We're still using the humanists' vernacular explanations.
We're running legacy software.
We are running a build that has been patched for 1,500 years. And it works, sort of, but it leaves us with that haunting question from the subject-predicate lag.
Right, the idea that we ignored a better tool for 1,000 years because of academic silos.
It makes you look at our current education system and wonder, what is the subject-predicate of the 21st century?
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about computer code. Think about systems thinking. These are the dominant logics of our era. We treat coding as a vocational skill, separate from language arts, but are they really separate?
You're saying that maybe the logic of coding loops, if-and statements, object-oriented structures, should be part of how we teach thinking, the way grammar was the OS for the medieval mind.
Exactly. By keeping them in their silos, computer science over here, English over there. Are we just repeating the mistake of the medieval grammarians? Are we failing to install the upgrades that would actually help the next generation process reality?
That is a slightly terrifying thought. That we might be teaching with a user manual that's 3 centuries out of date.
History suggests we probably are.
Well, on that cheerful note, I think I'm going to go update my own mental software. Maybe to diagram a sentence or two, just for old time's sake.
Just don't try to make it rhyme.
Deal. Thanks for helping us unpack this massive history.
A pleasure.
And thanks to you for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.